I'm David Brown. I'm the chair of the International Neural Network Society, INES History Committee. And we're doing interviews with some of our top research in the field who have also served with INES. Today, I'm talking with Dr. Dan Levine. He is currently a professor of psychology. His current research interests including neural network modeling of decision-making, cognitive emotional interactions, and higher order cognition. He also supervises a laboratory that runs human behavioral experiments on emotionally influenced decision-making. Dr. Levine is a fellow of the International Neural Network Society, having served on the INES Board of Governors from 1995 to 2008, and as INES president in 1998. He has authored a textbook entitled Introduction to Neural and Cognitive Modeling, and has served as senior or junior editor of 7 other books on neural networks and biomathematics. He was general chair of the 2013 International Joint Conference on Neural Networks and program chair of 2005 IJCNN. Well, Dan, it's awfully good to see you. I've been happy to see you to so many of our IJCNNs, and you've all had very cogent thoughts at those times. I'd like to begin by asking, how did you get into the field?
Okay, several things kind of came together, but the decisive time was when I was between 1968 and 1970. At that point, I had a master's degree in mathematics from the University of Chicago, and so it was in between the master's and the PhD. The war in Vietnam was going on, and I was looking for a way to fulfill military service without going into combat in a war that I didn't believe in. And so I ended up, through some family connections, being able to get into the public health service and work at the National Institutes of Health for 2 years. Now, I had the background in mathematics, but I always had this feeling that down the road, I would like to apply the math that I've learned to, in the largest sense, human problems. And this was a period of time when a lot of young people were getting interested in social activism and trying to make a difference in society, and using the buzzword of the time, making their word relevant, making their professions relevant, whether they were doctors or lawyers or ministers or scientists or whatever. So I wanted to find a way to make mathematics relevant. And this stay at NIH, where I had rather loose responsibilities, and don't ask me to justify that, had rather loose responsibilities, I said, well, here, this gives me an opportunity, because there are all these great neuroscientists around there. And one of the ways that math can connect to social problems is through neuroscience to psychology. And the other concurrent thing that was going on then was I was getting into a lot of discussions about similar things about brain and mind with various friends in the Boston area as well as in Washington, because I'd been an undergrad at Harvard. And one of those friends is still active in the field and still a fellow, and that's Paul Werbos. So my early discussions with him when we were both undergraduates and living 2 doors apart in senior year helped to shape my interest in what became neural networks later. So I got into the field at a time when very few of us had personal computers. The interdisciplinary dialogue between neuroscience and psychology, let alone between either of them and mathematics, was a ghost of what it is now. And there wasn't a lot of brain imaging. So on purely theoretical grounds, people like Paul and me and Steve Grossberg, who became my dissertation advisor, were just kind of a few of us who said, you know, we need to make these connections, even if the technology and the social zeitgeist is not ready for the connections, we need to make them. So while I was at NIH, I was mainly reading and working informally with some neuroscientists and also with some modelers. And then I decide, well, how do I combine that with my earlier interest in math? Where do I go for that? And since I had connections in the Boston area, and since there was a lot of AI as well as neuroscience being done at MIT, I figured that's the place I'd finish up my graduate work, still in math, but in the applied side of math. And I didn't know exactly who I was going to work with there, but once I got there, it looked like Steve, who at that time was an untenured associate professor, strange animal, but only a few elite schools like MIT have, seemed to be the one who was tying it most to the biology and the psychology. So I ended up doing my PhD with him. And this was the late 1960s. So this was before there was a recognized field of neural networks. Remember, the first ICNN, which became the IJCNN, was in San Diego in 1987, and INES was founded there. So I was working in it almost 20 years before there was such a thing as INES, and before there was a recognized field. And we fought against a lot of misunderstanding and underappreciation by people in a lot of different fields. AI, which non-biological AI under Minsky and Papert was relatively dominant there. And you had the neuroscientists and psychologists, some who paid some attention to modeling, but a lot didn't. And then it was very hard to find academic positions or people to work with after that. And that's why I was an academic gypsy for many years. Ended up after a postdoc at UCLA in medical school, kind of disguising myself as a general applied biomathematician. I got into some work on mathematics of predator-prey dynamics in animal populations, as well as in the nervous system. And I had positions in math at 3 other schools before I finally came to a department at UT Arlington, which seemed hospitable to giving me tenure, which they did in 1986.
So you have had a little journey before you reached your present position.
Yes.
And experience with Paul and with Steve Grossberg. Now, what do you believe are your most significant accomplishments?
Okay, most significant accomplishments, well, some of them you covered in the introduction. The textbook, which has now gone to a third edition. And third edition, I'd like to put in a plug for it, is not apparently sold as well as the first two editions. Partly, I think that it was a mistake I made of finding out that it was somehow the full text of it got onto a ResearchGate, and it took me a while to realize that I should get rid of that so it would sell better. And partly also, I think, because Erlbaum, who published the first two editions, is now part of a conglomerate, Taylor and Francis, also known as Routledge, and I'm not really totally sure as to where those two entities, what's the boundary between those two entities. But I think that being a larger organization, they can't changes sort of the dynamics of how they push individual products. And as you mentioned, a lot of my research has to do with neural network modeling relating to decision-making and cognitive emotional interactions. So, I mean, this kind of fulfilled my earlier dream of tying the mathematical modeling to social and psychological issues. And another accomplishment, another book that is not sold as well as I hoped it would be, is also published by Routledge. It's called Healing the Reason-Emotion Split. It doesn't have too much about neural network modeling per se. It has some, but a lot about neuroscience and psychology and how they deal with social problems, and how this idea, and this really goes back to Steve's early work, and this goes back to Paul MacLean, who was one of the neuroscientists I hung out with at NIH, that emotion and reason should not be considered opposites. They should be considered as part of different parts of an overall functioning system, which play different and interacting roles. They can interfere with each other, yes, but that they aren't intrinsically opposite to each other, because you need reasoning to figure out the best strategies for fulfilling your goals, but you need emotions to know what your goals are, to know what you want to do.
How about at the present time? You're continuing working in this area? What particular projects do you have?
Well, the present time is kind of odd because I'm just right now, at the end of this year, going on what's called phased retirement. I'm going to be half-time. My appointment will no longer be tenured professor. It'll be research professor from January of 24 to January of 27. And then after that, hope to continue to be active. If I'm emeritus and if they don't run out of space, hopefully they can keep my office and maybe lab. And just continuing to do the sort of things I'm doing. I'm in the early stages with some students of working on a follow-up to this last book I mentioned, which ties it more to social policy. And I'm continuing to do various things, working on problems which are determined by their importance and by my passion for them more than by their solvability or doability. And I can, at this stage, afford that luxury a little more, although I've all through my career, I've done it to a certain extent, which is why my progress has not been rapid in the typical standard academics. And so, among other things, I'm working with a couple of friends who are psychoanalysts in Rio de Janeiro and putting together something on reimagining Freudian psychoanalysis, including neural network modeling of some of its effects. And what else am I doing? Yeah, I'm ultimately, I heard a talk about by somebody who was actually, we interviewed for a job, although unfortunately he didn't take it, who was talking about the neuroscience and the psychology of bullying and trying to get a kind of neural network modeling of when people are cooperative and when people are bullies, involving the different brain areas.
What about the early days of the INES? That sort of coincided with your beginning in the field. What do you remember about those days?
Well, I mean, it was actually, by that time I was already tenured, and I was just continuing to kind of go back to earlier roots and have discussions with people who ran the gamut from engineers to social scientists about these, quote, big problems. And INES, there was a lot of excitement about INES. I remember a lot of excitement about that meeting in San Diego. You were probably there. Had I think it was 2,000 attendees, which is larger than any since then. And there was
that was a really exciting time for the field.
Yeah. And I don't think the field would be where it is without some of that excitement from that time. And you had people who had been working for a long time in the field who were getting recognized, and you also had people who were just catching the bandwagon and making strong contributions, people coming in from so many different areas.
And do you have a feeling what the professional society, in particular, what INNS should be doing in the future?
Well, I've been focused more on, INES really has these two sort of twin missions, one having to do with computer and AI engineering, and the other having to do with neuroscience and psychology. And my work has been more on the neuroscience side. I did some engineering consulting in the 1990s, but I've been mainly working on the neuroscience and psychology side of it. And in the course of writing the third edition of this textbook, I discovered the work of, I knew somewhat, but discovered even more as I delved through the literature since my second edition came out in 2000 and the third edition in 2019, I had to go through about 19 years of literature in between. And I discovered all kinds of people who actually do neural network modeling. Some of them are also experimental neuroscientists, but who I rarely, if ever, see at INNS meetings. So I think INNS needs to do a better job of connecting with some of the relevant subcultures that are also contributing to the field. Again, you lost the sound.
You're a long time observer of the whole AI field.
Yeah.
What do you have any views? What are people doing right or wrong in AI now?
Well, I think AI, like any technology, um, just the momentum of discovery and the momentum of use and profitability uh, vastly outrun people's ability to deal with it and adjust to it. And I remember, again, I told you about the student movements in the 1960s and early 70s. We were kind of hoping that social and psychological understanding would catch up to technology at that time. But if anything, the opposite happened. And AI, more than just about any other technology, it's just, gone rampant. Now, finally, people are both in our Congress and our president in the European Union, and even some of the AI pioneers like Jeffrey Hinton are now realizing, yeah, we need to slow down. We need to develop some rules for what's ethical, how fast people should be replaced by machinery, how much people should be replaced by machinery, when do you need a human in the loop, et cetera, et cetera. So I see that as um, the whole field of AI has somewhat gone rampant, and I think INES members are part of the problem as well as part of the solution, but we're starting to be part of the solution as well. And I see that as a healthy sign.
So, what is the solution?
Well, there isn't one simple solution. The solution is to keep cognizant of the fact that we need to, well, that we don't want to just throw people out of jobs. There's a number of jobs, I think, where people have been thrown out, but they shouldn't have been, like telephone service jobs. I know that most of my friends and my wife and I, and probably everyone else, has gone through times when we were frustrated by a menu over the telephone when we were trying to find something particularly having to do with health care or with a major product, service on a major product. And we wished we'd have a human being, particularly if our problems weren't one of their frequently asked questions. If our problems were unique to our situation, we wanted to have a human being we could talk to. And so we need to be cognizant of what humans can do that AI can't completely duplicate.
Finally, what advice would you give for a researcher just starting out in the field?
Mm-hmm. Well, as you've noticed by some of my other comments, a lot of my career has been following my bliss as far as problems of interest to me, and not necessarily those that would be safest or quickest in getting appointments or grants. It took me 11 years from PhD to get tenure, and another 11 years and a change of departments to get to full professor. And I've only been on 3 major federal grants, in addition to, well, some small kind of personal ones from connections with the military. So I haven't followed the path toward career advancement so much as I followed the path toward dealing with the big problems, trying to make things better for humanity, trying to make a difference as well as making a living. And I know that when I talk to people who are starting out, whether they're neural net people or, as I'm finding more frequently, people who are just kind of straight psychology students who aren't necessarily doing modeling now, I encourage the same thing in them. I encourage them to do the things that they care about, and I follow the excitement of talking with them and others about major problems of interest for humanity. And so the kind of advice I would give, follows my own tendencies. I can't really tell people to do something that I don't find natural myself.
Well, it has worked out very well for you and for society. It's been awfully good talking to you, Dan, and I hope to see you at more IJCNNs in the future.
Yeah, I don't have anything that would be suitable for the 2024 conference in Yokohama. I don't have anything that has enough modeling in it to submit to that, but hopefully if some of these more freewheeling ideas bear some fruit, I could submit something to the 2025 conference in Rome.
Well, then, I look forward to seeing you in Rome. So thank you very much, Dan.
Yeah, I hope so. And thank you for taking the time to interview me.